Well, I grew up at the foot of Grouse Mountain, so there were lots of places to walk to. I could walk to the Cleveland Dam, behind which was Capilano Lake, and I could walk to the Capilano Canyon, and I can also, just a few streets away, just start hiking up Grouse Mountain. So I did quite a lot of that. When I was in junior high, the junior high school I went to, Balmoral, it was a fair ways from where I lived. So I had a choice. I could either take the bus or I could walk. And my parents would give me an allowance for buying bus tokens. And so if I walked, I could, pocket the money. And so that's what I did. I really started walking a lot to and from Balmoral. And then, in senior high was Carson Graham. That was farther away, so I didn't walk there nearly as often, but that got me started on walks, and I had a tendency to wander actually all over North Vancouver. Sometimes I'd walk all the way down to Ambleside in West Vancouver, and it was just something that I felt like doing. It's just something that I like to do. I like to wander around. I like to explore. I guess I was always on the lookout for some kind of adventure. Like, I always wondered who or what I might run into, on these walks. Yeah, well, Philosophers Walks, it came to be over a long period of time, about 10 years. And it started off when there was a book that was being done about the culture of small cities. And one of the people participating, Peter Murphy, who taught English here, he suggested that I do something about walking in Kamloops. And he suggested that because I regularly walk from my house on Battle Street downtown. I'd walk from there to the university campus and back, well, at least in the fall and the spring, not as much in the winter. But that was a regular walk of mine. So Peter thought that I could do something about walking and philosophy in Kamloops. And so I thought, well, that's a good idea. And I started doing that. And when I started doing that, I started looking at, what other philosophers had been walking, what had they said about walking. And the first person that I encountered was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who did, a hell of a lot of walking and did a lot of his writing. While he was walking, he would write in notebooks or even on the back of playing cards. So he'd write while he was walking. The same with Friedrich Nietzsche. He'd do the same thing. He'd be out there in the mountains of Switzerland with notebooks in hand and jotting down all of his ideas. And so that went into an essay I wrote about walking in Kamloops that ended up being chapter 1 of my book, Philosophers Walks. The first draft of chapter 1 of my book was published in a different collection about culture of small cities called Whose Culture Is It Anyway? Published by New Star Books. I got into the project and I taught a class on the philosophy of walking, and got more heavily involved in other authors who wrote about walking, Thoreau, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I mean, he and Wordsworth were both great walkers, and both of them would do a lot of their writing while they were walking. Coleridge compared himself to a plein air painter. The plein air painter goes out in the countryside and sets up his canvas on the easel, out in the open air and paints from nature. And Coleridge is doing the same with his poetry. He was, walking through the countryside with a notebook in hand and jotting things down. So, yeah, and then I thought, well, who else should be in the book? I thought about Søren Kierkegaard because he was the flaneur of Copenhagen. He would walk all around Copenhagen and he would talk to all kinds of different people. That was a big source for his philosophical writing, is just his conversations with ordinary people, from the women at the fish market to the bourgeois in the cafes. He would talk to everybody from all walks of life. And the whole idea of the flaneur that also made me think about André Breton, the French surrealist who would go walking all over Paris. And Breton's most famous book, Nadja, is about his walks in Paris with this woman that he randomly encountered outside of a church, who was probably mentally ill. But anyway, that's a whole long story. But But I went to Paris and I reenacted all of the walks that Breton went on with Nadja, that he describes in his book. And then I used all of these walks as a way of exploring different philosophical themes. So there was one walk I did in the south of France, a place called Digne-les-Bains. And the reason that I went down there is because it was the home of a guy named Pierre Gassendi. And he was a philosopher at the same time as René Descartes, so in like the 1630s, 1640s. And René Descartes is most famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." And René Descartes says, well, I can be thinking, and that tells me that I have a mind, but I can't be sure that I have a body, because I might just be imagining that I have a body. I might just be dreaming the whole thing. So the mind is certain and the body is uncertain. I can't be sure that I even have a body. And Gassendi says, this is complete nonsense. You can't be thinking unless you have a body, that, all of the thoughts that occur in your mind are a result of bodily activity. And you could say, I think, therefore I am. You might as well say, I walk, therefore I am. Yeah, so I went down to Digne-les-Bains and walked around there. A Dutch artist named Herman de Vries had done this installation where you walk up a mountain path and see various things along the way. So I did that. So there's a chapter that explores what philosophers call the mind-body problem in Descartes and Gassendi, but using this walk near Digne-les-Bains as a way of trying to explore that problem. This artist, Herman de Vries, he had all of these things along the path that I was walking on that I was supposed to see. And I walked up to the end of the path at the summit of this mountain, and I didn't see any of the stuff I was supposed to see. There were supposed to be these spikes along the side of the trail that had these golden tips on them, and there was supposed to be a whole fence made out of these spikes, a palisade, and I didn't see that. And I got to the top, and I'm quite tired. It was a vigorous hike, and I can get my water bottle out, and I want to go sit down on this nice flat rock, but then I'm not able to, because I see the flat rock has got this tall spike with a golden tip in the middle of it. And that was the first I'd seen of any of these spikes that were supposed to be along the way. And then when I walked back down the path, oh, there's another spike with a golden tip, and there's another spike, and oh, there's the fence made out of a whole bunch of spikes put together. And all these things that I didn't see on the way up, I saw on the way down. And I asked myself, well, why would that be? Like, how could I miss these on the way up? I mean, they should have been just as obvious on the way up as they were on the way down. And I won't say what my conclusions were from that, but it certainly got me to think about it in a different way. And the other thing that it got me to think about, which would be obvious to anybody who's done any walking or hiking, is that when you're walking and hiking, especially a vigorous kind of hike, and your lungs are burning, and you can feel the aches in your muscles, and your heart rate goes up, there's no way that you're having a dream. That you're definitely awake and alive and living in a body.
Combination of body and mind.
Yeah.
Those heights.
Yeah. So there's just no denying the body when you're on a vigorous hike like that. So maybe Descartes should have gone on some more hikes.